Good. Thank you very much for being here in a wet Lismore at just after midday on Saturday. Obviously you can see we're joined by a large number of people. We'll try and get through this media conference as quickly as we can, get to questions that you may have about the flood response. The big message we want to send this morning, having spoken to Commissioner Wassing as well as New South Wales Police, is that this emergency is not over. And it's not over for the following reasons. The rivers are full, the rain is continuing and expected to keep falling in the days ahead, and wind conditions are very high and extreme, particularly on the coast, particularly in the Byron Shire, right up to the Queensland border. So for those three reasons, it's crucially important that the public not dismiss this weather event as something that's already passed. It really doesn't matter to us whether it's been downgraded from a tropical cyclone to a weather event or whether it's still a tropical cyclone. The effect on the Northern Rivers communities and lower down into the Coffs area is still the same for thousands and thousands of families. That's a really important point. This can't be just trivialised or put to one side. The emergency, the next 24 hours will be crucially important as we look to see what the weather event will do to these communities. I also want to make it clear that the SES have been working incredibly hard over the last 48 hours, as have police and other emergency services, but there's been 29 flood rescues across the Northern Rivers from different SES volunteer brigades. This I think speaks to the enormous bravery, the skill and dedication of many SES individuals and crews and teams. There's been 40 flood rescue crews that have been pre-positioned into the Northern Rivers, and as you can see, they were needed. There's also, of course, very sadly, a man missing in the Dorrigo region, and that's now a search mission in that upper Coffs Harbour region. We're obviously concerned about that, but we need to make it clear that the message is that hasn't deviated, particularly as we move through to the flood part of this natural disaster, and that is never drive through flood waters, never put yourself in danger. It's the most common way of people losing their lives during these flooding events. You risk your own life, a passenger in your car, a family member, and also SES and police officials who will be sent in to try and rescue you in the event that you're in difficult situations, and they'll always try, but we don't want to put them in harm's way. We're also going to speak today with Mal Lanyon about the recovery phase of this cyclone, and it's important that the public are aware that the planning is already going out, even though we're still in the ready stage, the response stage. We're still in the response stage, but we need to make sure that we're in the recovery, we're preparing for the recovery stage as well. And with that in mind, Mal will speak about appointing Scott Tanner as the recovery coordinator for Cyclone Alfred. That's incredibly important because the big message from Janelle and Steve and Kevin Hogan and many of the civic leaders in the Northern Rivers is that the recovery phase was too slow following the 2022 floods. We want to make sure that we're joining on the spot, that we can roll out urgent assistance where it's needed and get Lismore and Tweed and surrounding areas right down to Coffs Harbour back on their feet as soon as possible. The rainfalls have been extreme over the last 24 hours, where we've seen 120 mils in places like Dorrigo. We've also seen a lot of rainfall in this catchment, in the Northern Rivers catchment, particularly up in the Tweed. This is why the rivers are full, and the tributaries and rivers flowing into the Wilson is still a major concern for the SES and the New South Wales Government. Look, last thing I'll say is thanks to the thousands of volunteers and emergency service workers who put their own lives at risk to serve the community, to help complete strangers because they believe in public service. They've got a strong civic duty where I'm a huge debt of gratitude, and even though we're in the midst of this flood response, we can't minimise their incredible dedication, particularly over the last week. Thanks to everybody's cooperation thus far, we still need you to listen and act when it comes to emergency broadcasts, particularly from the SES. So, download the Hazards Near Me app, call the SES number if you're in trouble, call 000 if it's a life-saving emergency, and of course at all times follow the warnings, recommendations and alerts from the SES as we move through Cyclone Alfred. Alfred.
Just now.
Let's not.
It's Stuart. We call it Al.
How can I go on from that? Good morning, everyone. Our message simply is today is not to be complacent and do not drive through flooded waters. Overnight, we saw large amounts of rain across the catchment areas. 262 millimetres last night fell in Dorrigo and 132 millimetres in Lismore. That's a substantial amount of water. Dorrigo over the last 5 days has had over 750 mil of water. We've seen kids out today playing in drains. We've seen people driving through flood waters. Please do not be complacent. At the moment, our crews are out tending to trees down, power lines down, working with the energy companies. Our focus is now turning to the floods, and that will continue over the next 2 or 3 days. We're expecting many of our river systems, if they're not already there, into flood, from minor to major. We are working with the Bureau of Meteorology, who provide us with our information, and we act on accordingly to that. One of the things that we also need to look at is we are looking at the transition to recovery, and we're going to be working with Scott from the SES and working through that transition. So our message again today, please do not be complacent and do not drive through flooded waters.
Now?
Thanks, Premier, and thanks, Stuart. As both the Premier and Stuart have said, we are very much in the response phase, but the New South Wales Reconstruction Authority has been focused on making sure that we are planned to go into recovery quickly. One of the major learnings from 2022 is we want to recover the community quicker. To that effect, in my role as State Emergency Recovery Controller, I have today appointed Superintendent Scott Tanner as the Recovery Coordinator for the regions affected by Cyclone Alfred. Scott is the Commander of the Richmond Police District and has extensive experience in emergency management. I worked closely alongside Scott after the 2022 floods. He's greatly respected by both the community and the civic leaders throughout the community, and I know that he will make sure that we drive recovery quickly. The Reconstruction Authority has been working closely with councils, the EPA and Transport to make sure that we really focus on cleaning up quickly. We've noticed that there is significant amounts of debris right throughout the community. We want to make sure that that's cleaned up quickly so the community can see progress. We also want to support councils to make immediate roadworks so that roads are back in their normal state. We're focused very quickly on establishing recovery assistance points, which are places where we have all of our partner agencies come together and are really a one-stop shop so that members of the community can seek service. Prior to those being established, but we will be out in the community with the SES to make sure that we can provide support to the community and understand needs. Further details will be provided. Communication is always a key factor in recovery, and we want to make sure that the community know exactly what services are provided and what we can do to support you, and so that you can access if you require help. From tomorrow, there will be a website, www.nsw.gov.au/Cyclone Alfred Recovery. That site will contain all the information about recovery and services that you can access, information that is available to assist you. We've also had a first meeting with community groups to make sure that we've got significant engagement working, and that'll continue throughout the process. The New South Wales Reconstruction Authority is committed to working with the communities that have been affected throughout recovery, and I look forward to working closely with you. With that, I'll hand over to Superintendent Scott Tanner. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Premier. It is quite an honour to be appointed as the Recovery Coordinator. The lessons that I took out of 2022 will serve us well today, because not only do I know what worked, I know what didn't work. So our focus will be on getting this community back to as near as possible how it was pre-event. And with that in mind, I've already started discussions with our partner agencies, with the SES, with Public Works, and most importantly with the Reconstruction Authority. I can assure you that I'll work tirelessly to get all this work done as quick as possible. Three main focuses for me will be around the 3 R's. That is the road network, that is rubbish removal, and it's resupply. If we can get those 3 things done quickly, we can get this community back to how it needs to be. Thank you very much.
I welcome the appointment of the Recovery Coordinator while we're still in response, and particularly Superintendent Scott Tanner, who's well known, well respected right across the region, has a huge network. I worked with him closely in 2022, and as Superintendent Tanner said, we know what worked and we know what didn't work. I don't need to rehash that today. This is a good way of moving forward and into recovery. I'd also like to thank the community. It's really important. I can't do it enough. They were prepared. They heeded evacuation orders. I mean, everyone doesn't always have to agree with everything, but they acted, and they acted well, and that made the preparation better. Our agencies, the preparation was fantastic. SES, I have absolute confidence in Commissioner Wassing and his team, and Stuart and Greg and all the people on the ground. Fire and Rescue are here with us, fantastic. But there are a lot of uniforms on the ground, a lot of boots on the ground, and a lot of boats. So it was really pleasing to see, because I didn't see that in 2022. I have to say it was fantastic. We've got more boots. The ADF are here to help with the response. Wonderful. I've spoken to the Brigadier this morning and thanked her and thanked them, so that's great. And also, Essential Energy, Telstra, great work. They're here, you know, the things that they've done across the region. Last point, because the Premier said short and sweet. Not that I always follow.
Just remember his name, Alfred.
Yeah, Alfie. And it's about donations, because understandably a lot of people want to give, and they want to give what they've got, and you know, I understand it completely, but what I say is please go through Give It, and also to the other ones like the Salvos and Vinnies and Red Cross. They've launched their appeals. Go to the ones you know, the ones you trust, and also Give It. And look, with disasters and recovery, cash is paramount. So if you can do it a little bit, that's wonderful, and thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Janelle. And just picking up on that last point, the important thing about that a lot of people want to give, make sure we give it to the right organisations, and we give the things that they need. People may be tempted to just send stuff up here. That doesn't necessarily help. Just go through Give It, which is a partner agency, any other major charities. Look, I know that people this morning would have been, I suppose, breathing a little bit easier. We don't breathe a sigh of relief because, as you've heard, we are still in this process at the moment. We're expecting, of course, more weather and waiting to see the complete impact when we see what happens with the rivers and the tributaries in terms of the rain that's fallen over the last few days. But the one thing that, or one of the many things that we're incredibly proud of, has been the way that everybody has come together. We said that we wanted to do preparation better, and this has been a great example of what happens when everyone works together. Incredible leadership by the SES, supported then by the emergency service agencies, and if you allow me just to name them, we've had up here Fire and Rescue, we've had here the RFS, we've still got them, we've got Surf Lifesavers, Marine Rescue, we've got the AMBOs are up here, and we've also seen the ADF also here. Now that's all about, and the Volunteer Rescue Association, the VRA, and what that does is it shows that there was a combined effort to try and do as much preparation as possible. I said this before and I'll say it again and again. We may not be able to stop the natural disaster from occurring, but what we can be better at is our response to it, our preparation for it, making sure we keep people safe. And we've had over 5,600 incidents that have been responded to. The Premier talked about the 29 flood rescues. Obviously we're still dealing with a range of issues, but most importantly, what we're seeing now is thinking ahead towards the recovery, because the one thing that we know that's really clear, especially from 2022, is that we don't want to leave a gap between the response phase and the recovery phase. We're all in this together. We're making sure that we work through this together. And last but not least, can I thank two groups. I want to thank particularly the community for responding to our calls to take this seriously and to heed the messages. Them doing what they did made a big difference when the water started coming up. And secondly, I want to thank all of our emergency services personnel who are here, who have travelled from all different parts of the state. Many of them volunteers, and as the Premier said, they believe in a civic duty. These are people who believe in something greater than themselves. They're everyday people who do heroic things. And again, I would encourage people, if they've got time and they think they want to make a difference, join up with one of our emergency services as a volunteer.
Well, first of all, I just want to just thank Premier and Team New South Wales.
working so closely together with Commonwealth Government along with Queensland on dealing with the challenges ahead. I've got a couple of very important announcements as well, because the funding arrangements, as you're aware, have been called on earlier. It's called the DRFA funding arrangements. There's been an expansion of those funding arrangements. This is the first time there has been the DRFA called on before the event has concluded. Severn, Glen Innes, Armidale and Tenterfield are added as local government association areas that will be included. That's $15 million has already been allocated thanks to the state government and the government nationally, the Albanese government. That money is particularly already allocated for quickly dealing with some of the problems that we'll have with regards to rubbish, etc. The councils will have to do outlays fairly quickly, so the money's already in place, ready for when that's called upon. Again, thanks again to the state for such a quick movement on that space. Also, as has been named, the ADF, there's 120 additional ADF that have come to assistance with the Northern Rivers. Also, a number of interstate and international support has come through. New Zealand has sent over, government has sent over 66 disaster assistance recovery personnel, which will be here and assisting with Scott and the team, the New South Wales team, and the feds, making sure that we get those responses and the recovery further resourced and further capacity to make sure that we can respond as quickly as we can to the opportunities that we need to meet. I just want to do a final thing. I just want to do a shout out to the community, but also community leaders, mayors, councillors that have been really kept on top and feeding back information about what's happening in their communities. Along with Justine Elliott, Kevin Hogan. This is not a blue, green, red initiative or independence. This is a New South Wales initiative supported by the federal government and every layer of government. So congratulations so far.
Thanks, Tony, and we're all happy to take questions here.
I'll start.
Yep, go for it.
On Lismore's mind, obviously, is that CBD, the levy wall.
Yep.
What's the likelihood
Yeah.
of that topping or not, just for business?
Yeah, look, it's close. I mean, in all candour, the latest models are, it's right on 10.8, which could be just under, just over in various parts. We hope that it's under, but we've said from the very beginning, right from the beginning of Cyclone Alfred, that we would prepare for the worst and we would hope for the best. And I think if you come through town, for those that aren't in town and watching this on television, there's an enormous amount of resources in town. We're ready in the event, in the possibility of it overflowing. Obviously, we hope that it doesn't, but it certainly could. And if it does, it's likely to be today.
What would the processes be part of the recovery for people to move back into them and have been back, let's say in South Lismore, it's a little safer than in North Lismore where there's a lot of water.
Yeah.
What are those processes? What will they be?
It's just a really good question, and I can understand if you're subject to an evacuation order, you're staying with family and friends, you're at an evac centre, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, when can I go back? I can assure you, as soon as the SES can lift the order, they will. There's been several areas in Port Macquarie that are no longer subject to evacuation orders. The SES monitor it very closely with the bomb. They do it in real time. They don't muck around. We recognise, the government and emergency services recognise that we want to get families back into their community as soon as possible, but safety is the number one issue here. And with the Wilson either steady or slightly rising, now is not the time to be returning to your house in the Lismore area. So there's very clear, very precise evacuation notices through the SES and on the Hazards Near Me app, and we're asking people to stick by that.
What more can you tell us about the flood rescues that happened overnight?
Sorry, what's
the
that?
Flood rescues that happened overnight, the 29?
Well, there's 29. I am going to ask Stuart to speak to one in particular, which was a rescue that the SES performed, I think in the early hours of the morning.
Look, overnight we had 18 flood rescues. Majority of them were very minor to be out there, but we did have one in a place called Rock Valley, where a car 4-wheel drive went off the bridge into the water. New South Wales Police Rescue and New South Wales SES responded, and thankfully that gentleman was saved. But again, as I talked earlier, the complacency starting to slip in there. We do not want that. people are out looking, having a look at what's happening out there with the flooded waters, they do not know that it only takes about 30 centimetres of water, if that, to flush you off a bridge or into the river. So again, just be very, very careful.
That number as well, you said there were 18 overnight, but have there been 29 all up? Plus
there are around about 29 across the board, up and down the coast over the last 2 or 3 days. One, unfortunately, didn't go well at all. But again, this is where we're saying just be very, very vigilant, don't be complacent. Do not, and we say it time and time and time again, do not drive through flooded waters. You may have a four-wheel drive, you may think you can go through it, but as it showed last night, you can't.
How lucky is the man at Rock Valley? What sort of situation did he find himself in?
He simply misjudged going across the river system, across the bridge, got swept into the water. That's as simple as that. And that's the problem. People think they can go through flooded water because they've got a four-wheel drive, and they can't.
For those that are isolated, are you doing checks or supply runs for those? I saw a boat in North Lismore today, sort of heading that way.
Yeah, look, all our crews around, we've got community liaison officers out all over, up and down the coast. Last night we went to one gentleman that needed some assistance, and out of our own kitchens took him some stuff, some food to get him through, and then we've referred him on to community services. We'll monitor him, and we'll monitor everybody else and work with the evacuation team, the Emergency Operations Centre. So we are looking at all that, and we are managing it.
What are the current numbers in the evacuation centres?
I will first, Mr. Tanner.
Thank you. So at the Mass Evacuation Centre we have at Southern Cross Uni, we have 230 people that are in there at the moment. Across the Richmond Police District and the EOC that I'm looking after, there's 296, and there's roughly about 500 in the Tweed Byron area.
Great.
Thank you.
Can I ask you one question, a bit off kilter? I was in the Cognito Cafe earlier, and the business owner and the patrons were quite excited that you'd come in this morning for a coffee. I just wanted to ask you, was it a good brew?
You know what? Yeah, it was a fantastic coffee. What was the name of the cafe again?
Cognito Cafe.
Cognito Cafe. But we went into the Cognito Cafe, but we were not incognito. We had a fantastic coffee there. No, it was good. Look, I just want to make it really clear to everybody, despite the fact that I'm struggling to remember the name of this cyclone, it doesn't mean people should forget about it. It's still a serious threat. It's still a serious threat to thousands of people that live in the Northern Rivers and heading down the coast. We're asking you to continue to listen to emergency broadcasts. Be safe, act in the best interest of yourself, your family, your community, and think about the SES volunteers who might have to put themselves in harm's way to save your life. Anything else, guys?
How much longer are you sticking around for?
Well, I'm here. We've got to see it through, and we want to make sure that the town get back on its feet and that we learn the lessons from 2022. I mean, throughout this entire week, the message has gone to government that the Northern Rivers, and we need to stress this, and Janelle's the first person to do it, this isn't just about Lismore, it's also about the Tweed, the Byron Shire, Ballina. Lots of communities have had Tenterfield. Lots of communities have had an incredibly stressful week while they've been waiting for this cyclone to move through. And I want to assure them that the flood response, that the cyclone response has been for the entire Northern Rivers, stretching down into the Coffs region. The SES have been on it from the very first day.
And what exactly are you expecting in the days ahead in terms of the weather?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, that's the $64,000 question. We'll know more in the next 24 hours. Our concerns are swollen rivers, more rain potentially being on the way, and high winds. We're not out of the woods yet. It's very important that we get that message across to the community. Yes, sir.
Yeah, to avoid all this relief work and reacting to these sort of events that happen every 4 or 5 years, would your government commit to serious flood mitigation in the future to stop?
Yeah, we're looking at that. Obviously, it's been reported to me many times by many locals who've been here for decades. They know about the CSIRO report, which is due to be handed down. We're going to look very closely at that. We need to work with the Commonwealth Government in relation to that as well. And that's going to be part of the recovery.
Will you change the funding mechanism? Because you can't do it under the present system where local government's got to put up 1/3 of the cost. It's impossible.
Oh, I think you'd find, if you look at the flood recovery and the response, we have been putting enormous amounts of resources. We haven't asked the local government to put 1/3 in for emergency response or recovery. We know that local councils have got stretched budgets. We want to make sure that the community's whole, but we have to do it in a smart way.
Graham, I'm on the case. Don't
Any other
worry.
questions?
Okay.
We've got to get these people back to work. Last question.
When is that CSRO report due?
I have to come back to you, but soon.
End of June.
Yeah.